The North Atlantic, late autumn 1943. The sea churned grey and restless beneath a low ceiling of clouds. Kapitänleutnant Werner Henke stood in the conning tower of U-15, scanning the horizon through salt-crusted binoculars. His boat was a Type IXC, one of the larger U-boats, built for extended patrols far from home. For 2 years, Henke had hunted Allied convoys with brutal efficiency. 26 ships sent to the bottom, an Iron Cross First Class pinned to his chest. He was a grey wolf of the Atlantic, a predator who understood the rhythm of this underwater war. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. But on this patrol, something had changed. 3 days earlier, his hydrophone operator reported a strange sound. Not the familiar rumble of depth charges tumbling through the water, but something else. A cluster of splashes, 20, maybe 30, landing in a pattern ahead of the destroyer escort. Then, silence. Minutes passed. The crew waited for the explosions that always followed an attack. Nothing came. Henke ordered evasive maneuvers anyway, diving deeper, changing course. Still nothing. Just the metallic ping of enemy sonar sweeping through the dark. The next convoy they stalked, the pattern repeated. A destroyer made contact. The boat dove. Splashes above. Silence. But this time, U-388, operating nearby, vanished from the Wolfpack radio net. No distress signal, no final transmission. Just gone. Then U-221. Then U-531. All within a week. All after reporting similar contact with enemy escorts. Henke pulled his charts and studied the sinking reports filtering through from BDU headquarters in Paris. A new weapon, the intelligence officers speculated, something the Allies were deploying on their escort vessels, something that killed without the thunderous announcement of conventional depth charges. The U-boat commanders who survived encounters with this mystery weapon described a terror unlike anything they had experienced. One called it silent death. Another wrote that the destroyers could now attack while still tracking them on sonar, eliminating the precious seconds of blindness that had allowed so many boats to escape. In the wardrooms of Kriegsmarine headquarters, officers pored over fragmented reports. They knew depth charges. They understood the doctrine, the tactics, the survivability. But this was different. This changed everything. What weapon could strike with such precision? How had the Allies managed to eliminate the fundamental flaw that made depth charges survivable? And most troubling of all, if traditional anti-submarine warfare was being rewritten, what did that mean for the U-boat war? To understand how German submariners found themselves shocked, hunted, and driven to near extinction by a weapon they never saw coming, we must turn back to the fundamental problem that had plagued anti-submarine warfare since the first depth charges were dropped in 1916. The depth charge had been the standard anti-submarine weapon for nearly 30 years. The concept was elegant in its simplicity. A steel drum packed with 300 pounds of amatol or TNT, fitted with a hydrostatic fuse set to detonate at a predetermined depth. Roll it off the stern of a destroyer. Wait for it to sink. The explosion would create a massive pressure wave capable of crushing a submarine's hull or, at minimum, causing enough damage to force it to surface. Throughout World War I, depth charges accounted for nearly every U-boat kill achieved by surface vessels. But the weapon had a fundamental flaw, one so obvious that every submariner from 1916 onward understood how to exploit it. To drop depth charges, a destroyer had to pass directly over the submarine's last known position. This created what naval tacticians called the dead time. As the attacking ship approached, its ASDIC sonar, the British term for what the Americans called sonar, would track the submarine clearly. The returning echo pulses painted a picture of depth, bearing, and movement. But then, at approximately 200 yards, something happened. The sonar operator would lose contact. The physics were inescapable. Sound travels through water at roughly 4,800 feet per second. When a destroyer closed to within a few hundred yards of its target, The time between the outgoing sonar ping and the returning echo became too short for the human ear to distinguish. The transmitted pulse and the returning echo merged into what operators called an instantaneous echo. For all practical purposes, the submarine vanished. It entered a blind spot directly beneath the attacking ship, invisible to detection, free to maneuver without the destroyer knowing which direction it turned, and U-boat commanders exploited this mercilessly. The instant sonar contact was lost. They would execute sharp turns, 30 degrees, sometimes 45, speed changes, diving deeper or rising toward the surface. By the time the depth charges tumbled off the stern and detonated at their preset depth, the submarine had already moved. The explosions might be close, might even cause minor damage, but direct hits were extraordinarily rare. Throughout 1942, British and American escort vessels conducted over 5,000 depth charge attacks, 85 kills, a ratio of 60 to 1. Depth charging was, statistically speaking, an exercise in futility. Worse still, every attack alerted the submarine. The moment depth charges began exploding, the underwater environment became chaos. The blasts sent shockwaves rippling through the ocean, disturbing water layers, creating thermal disturbances, generating noise that made sonar useless for 10, sometimes 15 minutes. During that window, the submarine could slip away. Even if the destroyer scored near misses, even if it damaged the boat's hull or knocked out equipment, the crew could limp away under the cover of acoustic confusion. Many U-boats survived dozens of depth charge attacks. Some endured hundreds. U-427, operating off Norway in April 1945, survived 678 depth charges dropped against it over many hours. The crew was battered, traumatized, but alive. The boat returned to port. This was the mathematics of anti-submarine warfare in 1942. To protect a convoy, escorts had to detect a submarine, close to attack range, lose sonar contact, drop charges blindly, wait for the explosions to clear, then search again. If the submarine survived, which it usually did, the process repeated. Hours could pass, fuel and ammunition depleted. Meanwhile, other boats in the Wolfpack circled unmolested, lining up torpedo shots on merchantmen. The U-boats were winning the tonnage war. In the first 3 months of 1943, they sank over 500,000 tons of Allied shipping. Winston Churchill would later confess that the U-boat peril was the only thing that truly frightened him during the war. But in the halls of the British Admiralty, a small group of engineers and scientists were working on a solution. They operated from a division so unorthodox, so removed from traditional naval bureaucracy, that colleagues nicknamed them the Wheezers and Dodgers. Their official title was the Directorate of Miscellaneous Weapons Development. Their mission was to develop unconventional weapons for unconventional problems. And the problem of the blind spot was about to meet its solution. The concept emerged from an earlier failure. In 1941, the Royal Navy tested a weapon called the Fairley mortar. The idea was revolutionary for its time. Instead of dropping depth charges astern, fire them forward from a mortar mounted on the bow. Launch the charges while the submarine was still visible on sonar, before the blind spot swallowed it. The Fairley failed spectacularly. The mortar lacked range, the charges were too heavy, and the entire system proved unreliable in North Atlantic weather. But the principle, the core idea of forward-throwing projectiles, was sound. The Wheezers and Dodgers went back to the drawing board. They needed a system that could fire multiple projectiles at once, creating a pattern wide enough to catch a maneuvering submarine. The charges had to be small enough to launch from a deck-mounted weapon, yet powerful enough to sink a U-boat on direct contact. And critically, the system had to arm and sink quickly, reaching a submerged submarine before it could evade. The solution came from an unlikely source, an infantry weapon, the Spigot mortar. Lieutenant Colonel Stuart Blacker had developed the Spigot mortar design in the 1920s as a simple, adaptable infantry weapon. Unlike conventional mortars, where the propellant was built into the projectile, the Spigot mortar reversed the arrangement. A fixed spigot, essentially a rod, protruded from the base plate. The bomb, the projectile, had a hollow tail that slid over the spigot. The propellant charge was in the base, fired down onto the spigot, launching the bomb upward. The design was crude, but brilliant. A single launcher could fire projectiles of varying sizes. The weapon was mechanically simple, easy to manufacture, and required minimal deck reinforcement. The British Army had already deployed spigot mortars as the Blacker bombard, and later as the PAAT anti-tank weapon. The Directorate adapted the principle for naval use. They designed a launcher with 24 spigots arranged in 4 rows of 6. Each spigot would fire a small bomb, 7.2 inches in diameter, weighing 65 pounds. The bomb's warhead carried 35 pounds of Torpex, a mixture of RDX, TNT, and powdered aluminum that was 40% more powerful than TNT alone. The bombs would launch at slightly different angles, landing in a circular pattern about 130 feet in diameter, roughly 200 yards ahead of the ship. Once in the water, the bombs would sink at 23 feet per second, fast enough to reach a submarine at 200 feet depth in under 9 seconds, too fast for evasive maneuvers. The critical innovation was the fuse, contact detonation only. Unlike depth charges that exploded at a preset depth whether they hit anything or not, these bombs would only detonate if they struck something solid. A submarine hull. The seabed. Nothing else. This solved 2 problems simultaneously. First, a direct hit delivered the full explosive force against the target's hull, not through a cushion of water. Catastrophic damage was almost guaranteed. Second, and perhaps more importantly, if the bombs missed, they produced no explosion, no noise, no disturbance. Sonar contact remained clear. The destroyer could immediately adjust and attack again without waiting for the water to settle. The entire assembly, when mounted and loaded, resembled the spiny back of a hedgehog. The name stuck. The device was officially designated the anti-submarine projector, but to every sailor who ever loaded one, fired one, or watched one in action, it was simply the Hedgehog. In May 1941, the Royal Navy installed the first prototype on HMS Westcott, an aging W-class destroyer. Trials were conducted in Liverpool Bay against a known wreck. The weapon fired. All 24 bombs splashed into the water in a near-perfect circle. They sank. Moments later, a series of muffled detonations confirmed multiple hits on the submerged wreck. The test was a complete success. The Admiralty authorized immediate production. But success in trials did not guarantee success in combat. The North Atlantic was not Liverpool Bay. The real test would come when the Hedgehog faced a living, thinking, desperate U-boat commander fighting for his life. By November 1942, over 100 Allied warships carried Hedgehogs, destroyers, corvettes, frigates. The weapon could be retrofitted to almost any escort vessel without major structural modifications. But initial results were disappointing. The first few months produced only a handful of kills. Success rates hovered around 5%, barely better than depth charges. Crews were skeptical. The weapon looked odd. Firing it felt anticlimactic. And when the bombs missed, there was only silence. No reassuring thunder of explosions. No towering geysers to convince the crew they might have inflicted damage. Just quiet water and the knowledge that somewhere below, the enemy was still alive. Many captains hesitated to use the Hedgehog at all. They stuck with familiar depth charges. By early 1943, the situation had become so concerning that the Admiralty issued a directive. Any captain equipped with a Hedgehog who failed to use it during an underwater contact was required to file a report explaining why. The message was clear. Use the weapon, learn it, trust it. Because beneath the initial disappointment lay a truth that would soon become undeniable. When used correctly, the Hedgehog was the most lethal anti-submarine weapon ever created. The learning curve was steep. Hedgehog required precision. Unlike depth charges, which blanketed an area with explosions, Hedgehog demanded accurate positioning. The attacking ship had to maintain steady course and speed during the final approach. The sonar operator had to plot the submarine's depth and bearing with exactness. The firing solution had to account for the time the bombs spent in the air and sinking through water. A miscalculation of even a few degrees or a few seconds would result in a miss. And misses, remember, were silent. No explosions to mask errors, just the haunting quiet of 24 bombs settling harmlessly onto the seabed. But the crews learned, they drilled, they practiced attack runs until every movement became instinctive. Sonar operators refined their calculations. Captains learned to feel the rhythm of their ships, understanding precisely when to give the fire order. And slowly, steadily, the kill rate began to climb, from 5% to 10, then 15. Then, in certain well-trained escort groups, higher still. Ships that had spent months chasing U-boats without success suddenly started scoring kills. Not occasionally, regularly. The weapon that had seemed a disappointment was revealing its true nature. When a Hedgehog hit, the submarine died. Almost always. The reason was physics. A depth charge exploded at a distance from its target. The blast created a pressure wave that travelled through water, weakening as it spread. The submarine's hull, designed to withstand immense pressures at depth, could often absorb the shock if the explosion wasn't close enough. Damage, yes. Terrifying, absolutely, but survivable. A Hedgehog bomb, by contrast, struck the hull directly, 35 pounds of Torpex detonating against a few centimetres of steel. The explosion punched through. Water flooded in at crushing depth, electrical systems short-circuited, bulkheads buckled. The crew had seconds, maybe, before depth pressure completed what the bomb began. Moreover, Hedgehog hits often came in multiples. The circular pattern meant if one bomb found the target, others nearby likely did too. A submarine 76 metres long, sitting in a pattern 130 feet wide, faced overlapping kill zones. Survivors, what few there were, described hearing multiple impacts in rapid succession. Hull breaches in the forward torpedo room, the control room, the engine space. Simultaneous catastrophic failures. No time for damage control, no chance to surface. The boat simply imploded and sank. The statistics began to tell a story that naval historians would spend decades analysing. Out of 268 Hedgehog attacks documented by war's end, 47 resulted in confirmed kills, a ratio of roughly 5.7 to 1. Compare that to depth charges, 5,174 attacks, 85.5 kills, 60 to 1. The Hedgehog was, statistically, more than 10 times deadlier than conventional depth charges. By late 1944, among escort groups trained in its use, the kill rate reached 20%. 1 in every 5 attacks ended with a U-boat destroyed. Among elite crews, the rate climbed higher still. And for U-boat crews, the Hedgehog introduced a new kind of terror. With depth charges, you heard them coming. The rumble of the destroyer's screws overhead, the splashes of charges hitting the water, the countdown in your head, waiting for detonations. Terrifying, yes, but knowable. With Hedgehog, there was no warning. The destroyer maintained contact on sonar throughout the approach. The submarine detected the pings, knew it was tracked, but heard no change in the pattern, no increase in engine noise, no telltale sounds of charges being rolled off the stern, just steady sonar contact. Then, if the attack succeeded, a series of impacts against the hull so sudden, so unexpected, that the crew had no time to brace, no time to react, instant death. If the attack missed, the silence was almost worse. No explosions meant the destroyer knew immediately it had missed. No confusion, no waiting for water to clear. The next attack would come within minutes, and the next, and the next. Relentless, methodical. Each run more precise than the last, as the sonar operator refined the solution. U-boat commanders who survived Hedgehog attacks spoke of a feeling of helplessness. Against depth charges, skill and luck could save you. Against Hedgehog, only distance mattered. If the escort maintained contact, survival became a mathematical improbability. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. In the Pacific Theatre, the Hedgehog would achieve its most spectacular demonstration of lethality. May 1944. The USS England, a Buckley-class destroyer escort, received orders to intercept Japanese submarines operating north of the Admiralty Islands. The boat in question was I-16, a large fleet submarine carrying supplies to isolated Japanese garrisons. American codebreakers had intercepted and decrypted the submarine's departure message from Truk. They knew its route, its destination, its speed. The England and two sister ships, USS George and USS Raby, formed a search line. On the afternoon of May 19th, the England sonar operator gained contact. I-16, detected at 100 feet depth. The Japanese commander, realizing he was tracked, began evasive maneuvers, sharp turns, speed changes, following the England's wake to confuse the sonar picture, standard submarine tactics. The England made its first Hedgehog attack run. Miss. The bombs splashed down, sank, struck nothing. Silence. Second run. Miss. Third run. One bomb hit, but the big submarine, over 100 meters long with a double hull, survived. Fourth run. Miss. The crew was growing frustrated. 5 attacks against one boat, but Executive Officer Lieutenant John Williamson remained calm. After each miss, he studied the sonar returns, refined his calculations, adjusted the attack geometry. On the 5th run, the solution was perfect. All 24 Hedgehog bombs arced into the air, splashed down in a tight circle, and sank. 4 seconds passed. Then the crew heard it. Not one explosion, not 2. 4, maybe 6 distinct detonations in rapid succession. Multiple direct hits. The hydrophone operator reported breaking up noises. The massive submarine was dying. Minutes later, wreckage bubbled to the surface. Oil slick, debris. I-16 and her entire crew were gone. It was the England's first kill. It would not be her last. Over the next 12 days, the destroyer escort would accomplish something unprecedented in naval history. American intelligence had decoded Japanese orders establishing a submarine picket line. 7 boats stationed at intervals across a route Admiral Halsey had used twice before. The line was designed to intercept American carrier task forces. Instead, the England intercepted the line. One by one, the destroyer escort methodically hunted down and destroyed each submarine. May 22nd. Row 106, 2 Hedgehog attacks, 3 hits, sunk. May 23rd. Row 104. After sister ships George and Raby fired 8 unsuccessful attacks, England took over. Second salvo, 3 hits, sunk. May 24th. Row 116, first attack, 5 hits, sunk. May 26th. While en route to refuel at Manus, they encountered RO-108. First salvo. Multiple hits. Sunk. After resupplying, the 3 destroyer escorts returned to the patrol area searching for the last submarine, RO-105. Other ships located it first but failed to score kills over 30 hours and 21 attack runs. Finally, the task force commander radioed in frustration, "Oh hell, go ahead, England!" One more Hedgehog attack. 6 to 10 detonations. Row 105 destroyed. 6 Japanese submarines in 12 days. 5 sunk by the England alone. It remains the most devastating anti-submarine performance by a single ship in naval history. Admiral Ernest King, Chief of Naval Operations, sent a message that would become legend. There'll always be an England in the United States Navy. His promise was kept. When a new guided missile frigate was commissioned in 1963, she bore the name USS England, honouring the destroyer escort's extraordinary record. A record built on one weapon, the Hedgehog. But what of the German U-boat force, the crews who faced this silent killer in the Atlantic? For them, the introduction of Hedgehog marked not just a tactical shift, but an existential crisis. A weapon that fired ahead of the destroyer, bombs that only exploded on contact, no warning, no time to evade. The Kriegsmarine gave it a designation, Wabauerfer, thrown weapon. But U-boat crews had their own name, Stilly's Todd, silent death. By early 1944, the mere rumour that an escort carried this weapon was enough to change tactical calculations. Commanders ordered deeper dives, longer periods submerged, more aggressive evasion, the instant sonar contact was detected. But these measures came with costs. Diving deeper meant slower speeds. The Type 7 boats, workhorses of the U-boat fleet, could dive to 280 meters in theory. In practice, anything below 200 meters stressed the hull dangerously. Rivets popped. Seals leaked. The groaning of compressed steel became a constant soundtrack of terror. And the deeper you went, the longer it took to surface if you needed to run, to escape, to breathe. Extended submersion meant battery depletion. The electric motors could only run for so long before the cells drained. Then you had to surface, to run the diesels, and recharge. But surfacing meant exposure to radar, to aircraft, to the very destroyers you were trying to avoid. The mathematics of survival had shifted. In 1942, a U-boat could expect to complete 6 to 8 patrols before being sunk or damaged beyond repair. By mid-1944, that number had dropped to 1.5. New crews commissioning boats were, statistically, already dead. They just didn't know it yet. Training schools in Germany struggled to keep pace with losses. The curriculum, once spanning months of intensive instruction, was compressed into weeks. Young men barely out of their teens were given crash courses in engineering, navigation, torpedo mechanics. Then they were sent to sea. Many never completed their first patrol. Korvettenkapitän Peter Kremer, commanding U-333, wrote in his patrol log about encountering the new weapon for the first time. It was March 1944, south of Iceland. His boat had stalked a small convoy, waiting for darkness to attack, but a Canadian corvette detected them first. The corvette was older, a flower-class vessel, slow and unglamorous. Kremer wasn't worried. He'd survived dozens of depth charge attacks. He knew the drill: dive deep, wait out the barrage, surface when the escort ran low on charges. But this attack was different. The corvette maintained steady speed, steady bearing, sonar pinging continuously. Kremer ordered evasive maneuvers, hard turns at random intervals, speed changes from slow to full. Nothing shook the contact. Then came the splashes. His hydrophone operator counted 24 distinct impacts on the surface. Kremer waited for the explosions. None came, just the steady ping of active sonar still locked on his boat. He realized with a sinking feeling what that meant. The weapon had missed, but the corvette knew it had missed. Another attack run was coming. 3 minutes later, another pattern of splashes. Again, no explosions. The corvette turned for a third run. Kremer's chief engineer reported battery power at 40%. If they stayed submerged much longer, they wouldn't have enough charge to maneuver effectively. But surfacing meant certain death under the corvette's guns. The fourth attack came 6 minutes after the third. This time, one bomb struck the aft diving plane. The explosion wasn't catastrophic, but it jammed the plane in the down position. The boat started plunging toward crush depth. Engineers wrestled with manual controls while the depth gauge spun past 180 meters, 190, 200. They regained control at 220 meters. Hull plates groaned under the pressure. Small leaks sprouted from seals that had been perfectly sound minutes before. Kremer ordered the boat to the surface. Better to face gunfire than die at depth. They blew ballast and erupted into the night. Air. The crew scrambled out, hands raised in surrender. The corvette's searchlights pinned them like insects. But the Canadian captain held fire. U-333 became a prize capture, towed to port with Enigma codebooks and technical documents intact. Kremer and his crew spent the rest of the war in prison camps. They were the lucky ones. Not every encounter ended in surrender. U-546, a Type IXC, under the command of Kapitänleutnant Paul Just, engaged a convoy off the American coast in April 1944. The boat torpedoed and sank the destroyer escort USS Frederick C. Davis, a devastating blow that killed all hands. But the victory was short-lived. Other escorts in the screen, USS Flaherty, USS Pillsbury, and USS Chatelaine, converged on U-546's position. They carried Hedgehogs. The three ships worked in coordination, one maintaining sonar contact, while the others maneuvered for attack runs. Hedgehog patterns rained down methodically, precisely. On the seventh attack, multiple explosions. U-546 imploded at depth. 46 men died. The exchange rate was stark, one American destroyer escort for one German submarine and all hands. In the brutal calculus of attrition warfare, those numbers favored the Allies. By the summer of 1944, U-boat losses had reached catastrophic levels. In June alone, 25 submarines were destroyed. July saw 30 more. August brought 27. The Allies were sinking boats faster than Germany could build them. Dönitz continued sending crews to sea because the alternative, admitting defeat, was politically impossible. But privately, he understood. The war beneath the waves was lost. The combination of centimetric radar, long-range patrol aircraft, escort carriers, and the Hedgehog had turned the Atlantic into a graveyard. The weapon's impact extended beyond pure numbers. The psychological effect was devastating. U-boat crews had always known their service was dangerous. The casualty rates were never hidden. But there had been honor in it, a sense that skill and courage mattered, that an experienced commander could outwit the enemy. The Hedgehog stripped away that illusion. It reduced submarine warfare to a mathematical problem. If the escort maintained sonar contact and the attack geometry was correct, the submarine died. No amount of seamanship changed the equation. Veteran commanders with dozens of patrols perished just as easily as green lieutenants on their first mission. Letters from U-boat crewmen, intercepted and read by Allied intelligence, revealed the depth of despair. One radioman wrote to his family that the ocean had become transparent. "We cannot hide," he wrote. "The enemy sees everything." Another sailor described feeling hunted like an animal. "The predators have become prey," he noted. "The boats that once terrorized convoys now flee at the first hint of contact." A mechanic from U-711 wrote simply, "I do not expect to see Germany again." He was correct. His boat was sunk by HMS Vanoc using Hedgehog in November 1944. No survivors. The Kriegsmarine attempted countermeasures. They developed the Falke acoustic torpedo, a homing weapon that tracked Allied escort propellers. The theory was sound. If destroyers had to maintain steady speed for Hedgehog attacks, they became vulnerable to acoustic torpedoes. But the Allies countered with the Foxer, a noise-making device towed behind escorts that decoyed the torpedoes away from the ship. Then came the Nat torpedo, an improved acoustic weapon. The Allies responded with more sophisticated decoys and evasive maneuvers. The technological race continued, but the fundamental problem remained. Hedgehog worked. And once a weapon works that well, the only defense is to avoid engagement entirely. Some U-boats adopted extreme measures. They limited surface time to mere minutes, just long enough to gulp air and partially recharge batteries. They abandoned traditional patrol zones, venturing into remote areas where convoys rarely traveled. They transmitted radio messages in compressed bursts lasting only seconds, hoping to evade direction-finding equipment. None of it mattered. The Allied anti-submarine network was too comprehensive, too methodical. Hunter-killer groups roamed the Atlantic, searching specifically for U-boats. Escort carriers provided air cover that stretched for hundreds of miles. Destroyers and corvettes equipped with Hedgehogs prosecuted contacts with relentless efficiency. The final year of the war saw the U-boat arm reduced to a shadow force. New boats still commissioned and sailed. The Type IXC submarines, with improved underwater performance and schnorkel breathing apparatus, promised to restore German advantages. But they arrived too late and in too few numbers. By April 1945, when the Reich collapsed, most Type IXC boats had never completed a combat patrol. The traditional U-boat fleet had been effectively annihilated. Of 40,000 men who served in German submarines during the war, 30,000 never returned, a casualty rate of 75%, the highest of any military branch in any nation during the Second World War. What lessons did the U-boat disaster teach? For naval strategists, the Hedgehog represented a paradigm shift. It proved that anti-submarine warfare could move beyond the crude tactics of area saturation. Precision mattered. Contact detonation was superior to proximity detonation. Forward-throwing weapons eliminated blind spots that submarines exploited. These principles would shape every subsequent development in anti-submarine technology. The American Navy retained Hedgehog well into the Cold War, eventually replacing it with ASROC, an anti-submarine rocket that extended the concept to even greater ranges. The Soviet Union copied the weapon as the MBU-200, later developing it into the MBU-600 with enhanced range. But the legacy extended beyond hardware. The Hedgehog demonstrated what systematic application of technology could achieve against even the most skilled opponents. U-boat commanders were not cowards. They were experienced sailors operating sophisticated machines in one of history's most brutal campaigns. But experience and courage could not overcome a weapon system that eliminated the fundamental vulnerabilities they relied on. The depth charge's blind spot had been the submariner's salvation. Hedgehog closed that gap. Once closed, survival rates collapsed. Modern anti-submarine warfare owes its entire doctrine to lessons learned from the Hedgehog era. Today's navies don't use spigot mortars anymore. They deploy homing torpedoes, vertical launch rockets, networked sonar arrays, and autonomous underwater vehicles. But the core principle remains unchanged. Maintain contact. Strike with precision. Eliminate escape opportunities. The technological sophistication has evolved, but the fundamental concept, forward-throwing contact weapons that deny the target time to evade, traces directly back to those 24 spigots bristling from the bows of destroyers in 1943. There is a museum display at the National Museum of the United States Navy in Washington. A restored Hedgehog launcher stands in the anti-submarine warfare exhibit. The spigots rise at angles, still bearing traces of paint from wartime service. A placard explains the weapon's specifications, its kill ratio, its role in turning the Battle of the Atlantic, but no placard captures what it meant to hear those bombs splash into the water above you. No statistics convey the terror of waiting in darkness, knowing that silence meant the weapon had missed, but that another attack was seconds away. No display recreates the final moments of U-546 or Row 105 or the hundreds of other submarines that felt Hedgehog bombs punch through their hulls. For German U-boat captains, the encounter with Hedgehog marked the moment they realized the war beneath the waves was unwinnable. Depth charges they understood. Depth charges they could survive. But this was something new, something that changed the fundamental calculus of submarine warfare. When the splashes came and the silence followed, they knew. The predators had become prey. The Atlantic, once their hunting ground, had become their grave. And so we return to where we began. Late autumn, 1943. Kapitänleutnant Werner Henke, in the conning tower of U-15, scanning for convoys, increasingly aware that the war had shifted. The mysterious weapon his fellow commanders reported was not a rumor. It was real. It was everywhere. And it was lethal. Henke would survive another 6 months before his boat was sunk off Madeira in April 1944. Not by Hedgehog, ironically, but by depth charges from American destroyers. He was captured, taken to a prisoner of war camp in the United States, and shot while attempting to escape. His war ended not in the Atlantic depths, but on a June night in 1944, far from the ocean he had prowled. But the lesson his generation learned persists. Technology reshapes warfare. New weapons change tactics. When the enemy eliminates the vulnerability you depend on, when they close the gap you exploit for survival, the balance shifts irrevocably. The Hedgehog was not the largest weapon of World War II, not the most celebrated, not the most expensive or complex. But bomb for bomb, life for life. It may have been the most effective anti-submarine weapon ever deployed in combat. Simple in concept, devastating in practice. A circle of death that fell silently from the sky and decided the fate of the Atlantic. The wrecks lie there still, scattered across the ocean floor from Norway to the Caribbean. Steel hulls corroding slowly in the dark, each one a tomb for men who believed courage and skill could overcome technology. They learned otherwise. The silent death found them, and in finding them, it rewrote the rules of naval warfare forever. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now, and don't forget to subscribe.